Okay, the next question says, I've heard some outlets, like Digital Foundry, really buy into the argument that hardware companies are making up about prices going up, due largely to inflation, diminished price/performance gains from smaller process nodes, and other increased costs. What's your take on how much price increases, particularly in GPUs, are really being driven by costs as opposed to profit taking? So basically, the increased price in GPUs, is it justified? Are there factors that are driving up prices as significantly as we're seeing, or are they getting a bit greedy, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, I mean,
obviously there's inflation, but
yes,
is there inflation that sees like a 40 series class or what should be like a 4060 Ti become a 4070 Ti at, that price, or
like double the price?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously not. I mean, inflation is not contributing that much.
I wouldn't have thought so.
At least it's not contributing in a way that would explain the price increases. Mm-hmm. It would be maybe a small component, but not the whole picture. Mm-hmm. As for like using the smaller nodes being a significant increase to the cost of the dies and so on, I mean, that's going to be a part of a factor, but that's also countered somewhat by, at least from NVIDIA's side of things, using smaller dies for the equivalent tier and pricing than what we saw in the previous generation. The 4070 Ti is using a much smaller GPU die than the $800 GPU from the previous generation, which was like 3080 type sort of pricing. So we're sort of going from these maybe cheaper but larger dies to a more expensive but smaller die. So I would expect that to sort of balance out
price
to some
should
degree.
Be somewhat, offset there.
The rest of the components on the card, I would imagine, have a fairly similar cost because we're seeing similar usage of memory, similar power requirements outside of the super high-end products, of course. Coolers don't look to be significantly altered compared to the previous generation. So all those factors, it doesn't really look like there's a significant hardware component that's sort of obviously taking a $500 GPU, making it $800. Like that's a massive increase in price. And the GPU dies themselves are only a fraction of that cost. Like the actual cost of the die can often be in the sort of $100 to $150 range. Mm-hmm. Like it's not that much silicon. Mm-hmm. And certainly, RDNA 3 has this multi-die approach as well, which is supposedly able to reduce costs, but then their flagship GPU is priced at exactly the same level as the previous generation. Mm-hmm. So, when you look at sort of the financial reports of these companies, the margins on GPU products are very high.
They're not going broke.
No, they're certainly targeting like 50 to 60% margins on a lot of their sort of graphics products, which is very high. Like, that's a huge chunk of profit per GPU. And then obviously AIBs are also taking a chunk of a small chunk. But, over the years, we've seen 4070 Ti's costing like this $1,000 models. It's an $800 GPU MSRP. Mm-hmm. So, I don't agree that it's like the cost increase is explainable by things like inflation and the change in GPU nodes. No. It seems mostly like they're pricing it to the market, except that market doesn't actually exist at the moment.
Yeah.
So
the AMD and NVIDIA price inflation is larger than inflation.
Yeah, and if inflation for things like GPU dies was a significant factor, then we'd see issues for things like AMD's Zen 4 products, which went from TSMC 7 to 5 nanometer and are priced basically the same. And if anything, aren't the chiplet dies slightly larger? The IO die is now using 7 nanometer. So, and they cost the same. So it's theoretically, if that was a factor, that would also be impacting CPUs, but it hasn't. So, I'm not buying it.
No.
I'm not buying it.
No.